Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to open this second session. My name is Luigi Nuzzo. I'm a legal historian of the Faculty of Lecture, and really a great pleasure to start this session. This session is seems to me the more legally oriented session. We are full of lawyers, political scientists on my left, and is focused on migration and fundamental rights, national, European and global approaches. Well, as you know, titles construct the object that they seem to only describe, so we received from these titles from suggestion to organize our session, and seems to me we, Susanna and Saverio, give us so two point observation for discussing this topic. One is a thematic one, obviously, migration as fundamental rights, or migration or as fundamental rights, we have to see. And well, as legal historian, this pushed me back to the prehistory of international law, and I think to use migrandi, the second scholastic. And then the other point is a spatial one. We have to look to this problem from not only from a national point of view, obviously, but from a European and global approach. And this point, this spatial point, means for me to reflect about the relations between states and sovereignty, state sovereignty and supranational organization and global governance. That is the main topic of this congress. So, according to the instruction received by Susanna, you are warmly invited to respect the time, 15 minutes, I think, for the presentation, in order to have time enough for the discussion. The first speaker is Professor Attilio Pisano, is my colleague at Law Faculty of University of Salento. Attilio is Professor of Human Rights and Legal Philosophy, and he deals with human rights problems. His recent book is dedicated to this topic, and well, with Attilio, I'm very proud to say this. We are organizing within the law faculty a new course of global migration that should start next year in Lecce, 11 course on global migration in a Euro-Mediterranean area. The presentation of Attilio is titled Borders and Migration, a Challenge for Human Rights. Please, Attilio, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. I would like to thank Luigi for the presentation, and above all the colleague Susanna Caffaro for her invitation. My paper will be in Italian. We have the possibility to translate the paper thanks to Claudio, so we will work together in this presentation. The title of the presentation is Border and Migration, a Challenge for Human Rights. In questo intervento, so I will speak a few sentences, and then Claudio will do the translation, the simultaneous translation. In questo intervento vorrei soffermarmi su 3 temi che, messi in relazione, possono contribuire, a mio avviso, a fornire una chiave di lettura per comprendere la complessità delle questioni legate al fenomeno migratorio e le responsabilità che da tale complessità scaturiscono. Vorrei quindi svolgere un breve ragionamento che parta dai diritti, dal primo tema, utilizzando come griglia ermeneutica e di comprensione il ruolo dei confini, per poi concludere con un approccio specifico al tema del fenomeno migratorio. Secondo me ogni tentativo di approcciarsi al fenomeno migratorio con l'intento di investigarne parte delle cause e parte delle soluzioni politico-legislative, oggi più che mai, deve necessariamente passare da una più ampia riflessione che tenga in considerazione da un lato la questione dei diritti in gioco, imperativo dal quale non si può prescindere, dall'altro il fenomeno del revanchismo dei confini, tratto distintivo dei nuovi movimenti sovranisti che molto spesso sono anche movimenti anti-immigrati.
During this intervention, I would like to focus on three topics in particular, which are important and the key to understand the complexity of all the matters related to migration and its responsibility that comes from the complexity that we have with it. In particular, I would like to discuss the first topic of rights. Then I would like to discuss about borders, and finally about the migration phenomenon itself. Any attempt to approach migration in order to understand what the causes and the political and legal solutions can be, it always needs to take into account the matter of the rights, of human rights that are involved in this whole process, and we also need to pay particular attention to the borders and their role and how all the sovereign movements right now are acting towards these, and in particular these movements which are also anti-migrant movements.
Immigrazione, infatti, diritti e confini sono tre facce dello stesso prisma. È impossibile parlare di immigrazione senza considerare che il linguaggio normativo dei diritti è il luogo in cui si manifestano le esigenze morali di giustizia del nostro tempo. È impossibile parlare di diritti senza entrare nel merito dell'universalismo dei diritti. È impossibile infine parlare dell'universalismo dei diritti senza indagare e studiare adeguatamente il ruolo che proprio i confini hanno nella cosmopolis. Il tema del rapporto fra diritto e territorio, che è il primo tema che vorrei affrontare, è stato ampiamente trattato da una certa letteratura scientifica, infatti, che ne ha più volte messo in evidenza una vera e propria evoluzione segnata dalla scomparsa dei confini, figlia anche dalla globalizzazione che ha determinato una perdita di senso del confine. Scomparsa dei confini che si riflette anche nel diritto, con l'avvento di un diritto globale che si afferma oltre lo Stato, parole di Sabino Cassese, di un nuovo diritto despazializzato, aterritoriale, riluttante ad ogni limitazione di tempo e spazio, Natalino Irti, verso la creazione di un diritto ispirato a principi di natura meramente economica e o commerciale, il cosiddetto diritto transnazionale, oppure radicato in quella che Danilo Zolo definiva l'ideologia del globalismo giuridico.
Immigration's rights and borders have to be seen as the three aspects of the same thing. It is impossible to talk about migration without even considering justice and without considering all the regulations that come with the needs, with the moral needs of that we have right now, of our time. It is impossible to avoid talking about rights if we don't talk about the universalism of the right holders as well. It is impossible to talk about universal rights without even considering the role of the borders, which are specific for the concept of cosmopolis. If we I would like to start with the topic of rights and territory, which is one of the topic that has already been discussed quite a lot in the scientific literature. And what I would like to focus on is the the evolution that we are having right now, which is the disappearance of the borders as a result of globalization, which is in a way losing the efficacy of the borders itself. What I would like to talk as well is about a global law that we are having right now, which is stating itself beyond the states, beyond the spatial borders, beyond the territory, and we also talk about a law that is inspired by the principle of the economic and commercial nature of a state, and what we now call the ideology of juridical globalism. So even if we consider all these, we can also talk about the global law now, which is a multi-level constitutionalism, which plays beyond the borders of each state.
La questione non è semplice da affrontare. Le questioni infatti politiche, filosofiche e giuridiche sollevate dal riconoscimento dell'alterità e dall'integrazione sono tra le più complesse. Uno dei temi centrali, infatti, quando si parla di diritti, è proprio quello del passaggio dal piano formale, quello dei cataloghi di diritti, delle dichiarazioni, delle convenzioni radicate dagli Stati, a quello sostanziale. Il passaggio, insomma, dalla teoria alla pratica, dal momento dichiarativo, il piano sovrastatale, il piano internazionale, a quello applicativo. Nell'espansione illimitata del diritto dei diritti umani, quindi, la presenza o meno di funzionanti meccanismi istituzionali e procedure capaci di governare il passaggio dalle Human Rights Policies alle Human Rights Practices introduce una variabile significativa nel dare effettiva garanzia ai diritti e quindi nel realizzarsi. La presenza di questi meccanismi istituzionali, il più delle volte giudiziari, introduce una variabile che nello spazio globale, paradossalmente, ripropone la logica del confine, della frontiera, perché segna nuovi solchi, nuovi limiti spaziali. Laddove esistono le giuste condizioni politiche e istituzionali, i diritti si concretizzano, si realizzano, si fanno reali strumenti di cambiamento e progresso sociale e di riconoscimento di pari dignità delle persone. Laddove invece queste condizioni non esistono o non riescono a realizzarsi per motivi politici o culturali, il ricorso ai diritti è improduttivo di effetti, si svuota, diviene retorico e i diritti vengono quindi mutilati perché non si sporcano le mani, possiamo dire così, con la durezza della realtà.
The matter is not easy to address. The philosophical, the political matters are very complex indeed. If we want to discuss one of the main topic, we obviously have to talk about the rights and what happens in between the passage from a formal right to an actual substantial right. So the passage from theory to practice, that's what I would like to talk. So the passage from human rights policies to human rights practices, which is a significant variable in order to give rights to these people. So the presence of such mechanism are variables which can create new borders as well. So where we have the right conditions, we can always have this passage from theory to practice. And but where these conditions are not present, then this becomes rhetorical. It becomes a rhetorical discussion, and everything fails.
Questa premessa è utile, secondo me, perché evidenzia un elemento di complessità e un paradosso che segna i diritti umani. I diritti postulano l'universalità, ma si fanno strumento di tutela effettiva della dignità umana in spazi che sono sempre più limitati, segnati da nuove frontiere, da nuove barriere, da nuovi confini. Il successo dei movimenti sovranisti, non solo in Europa, la riscoperta delle frontiere, della difesa dell'identità nazionale, d'altro canto, della centralità anche simbolica dell'ethnos, Sono tutti momenti di un movimento storico che sembra andare in direzione opposta a quello delle spinte cosmopolitiche incarnate dai diritti. Quindi noi abbiamo i diritti che hanno questo approccio che è necessariamente cosmopolitica, la logica del confine che si ripropone quando esistono le condizioni strutturali per garantire il passaggio dal law in books al law in actions, e al tempo stesso il tema del rapporto fra diritto e territorio è centrale nei nuovi movimenti sovranisti che si stanno affermando negli ultimi decenni. Questa rappresentazione della fenomenologia dell'immigrazione, che guarda i diritti senza dimenticare il peso dei confini, è utile perché ci suggerisce che il passaggio di frontiera non è solo un passaggio fisico da un luogo ad un altro. Il passaggio di frontiera è uno stargate che unisce universi, dimensioni, che sono dimensioni parallele. Da questa parte c'è l'universo dei diritti, dall'altra parte l'universo dei non diritti.
So this premise I've just made is a paradox of human rights themselves, and all this is always marked by borders and borders that people have to face. The success of sovereign movements, which are not only in Europe but all over the world, are focusing on borders, on national identity, on the concept of ethnos, which is in contrast with the cosmopolitan movements that we've had so far, and all this is of course clashing with each other. The passage of a border for a human is not just the going from one country to another. It also represents a stargate in a way, which in between parallel universe. Okay, so every time a person goes from one country to another, it goes from one parallel universe to another, and this is what the migration phenomenon is characterized by.
Ogni volta che quindi accettiamo, legittimiamo, guardiamo senza responsabilità o con superficialità alle dinamiche che riguardano l'attraversamento dei confini, l'apertura, la chiusura dei confini, si finisce per corroborare, per rafforzare la logica anticosmopolitica, dividente, includente o escludente del confine, us and them. Ogni volta che si utilizza la logica del confine si pongono caratterizzazioni, categorizzazioni, insiders and outsiders, dividenti l'unità della famiglia umana, quell'unità della famiglia umana che deve essere, che è il presupposto per l'affermazione, il riconoscimento e la tutela dei diritti. Ogni volta che si divide la famiglia umana si cade nell'irreversibilità della logica binaria umano-non umano, noi e loro, una logica che può facilmente produrre, favorire, corroborare deumanizzazione nei confronti del migrante, dell'extracomunitario, e quindi produrre discriminazione nei confronti del diverso, del soggetto debole e vulnerabile.
Every time we accept these nationalism and these sovereign movements, we also accept an anti-cosmopolitical, cosmopolitan logic, which of course makes an emphasis on us and them, on what we are and what they are, and all this is also something that will at the end will finally divide the unity of the human family. All this will also leads to dehumanization and in the towards migrants, towards the extra-communitarian people, and all these people who are diverse, weak, vulnerable, and in this way we also start some form of violence towards these people.
Questa necessità di rivedere il rapporto fra diritto, diritti e territorio si riflette anche, a mio avviso, nell'Unione Europea. Nello spazio globale, infatti, non esiste regione che abbia subito più cambiamenti nei confini di quanto l'Europa negli ultimi 60 anni. La storia dell'integrazione europea è la storia di un processo irreversibile ormai, di disarticolazione, al contempo di proliferazione di confini, tra territorialità, sovranità e nuove forme di appartenenza e di cittadinanza. Lo stesso ministro degli interni Minniti, in un'intervista al Messaggero del luglio 2017, dichiarava che i confini dell'Europa sono in Africa, a sud della Libia, e quindi non c'è confine più cangevole di quello europeo. Questo processo di recente ridefinizione delle frontiere ha quindi introdotto un nuovo confine, quello europeo, che non ha sostituito quello statale, introducendo così nuovi meccanismi di inclusione ed esclusione a quelli già esistenti, determinati dai confini statali. Questo accavallamento di confini è una delle cause della proliferazione che abbiamo visto negli ultimi anni nell'Europa dei diritti di no rights zone, zone che rischiano di divenire, parafrasando un libro molto conosciuto, almeno nella letteratura quantomeno sociologica italiana, di Federico Raola, zona definitivamente temporanea, luoghi dell'umanità in eccesso, che si creano non a caso a ridosso dei confini statali ed europei, a Bardonecchia, al confine tra Italia e Francia, nell'Alta Savoia, a Ventimiglia, a Calais, a Lesbo, Idomeni, Kos, in Grecia, tutte zone in cui il tema dei diritti diviene di secondaria importanza. Mi avvio verso la conclusione.
This whole process of borders that we have is also reflected in the concept of the European Union itself. In particular, in the past 60 years, we've had a redefinition of borders all the time within European Union. What is very interesting to understand and to focus on is how these borders have been redesigned in the last few years. In particular, I can quote the Internal Affairs Ministers, Italian Internal Affairs Ministers, Marco Minniti, who claimed that the borders, European borders, are in Africa, are in Libya now. So, which is very important to understand how the migration process is also impacting on Europe. These also focuses on the mechanism of inclusion and exclusion of these people, and how we now can talk about areas which are in excess of humans. And I would like to he wanted to focus to quote on a scientific literature book by Federico Raola, and what is very interesting to see is how all these happens in specific places in the borders, such as Bardonecchia or Calais or Lesbo or Kos or some places in Turkey.
In questa situazione di confusione, concludo, di crisi, di confini che si accavallano, si rinnegano, l'unica strada per la gestione del fenomeno migratorio in Europa è stata quella del ricorso, e in Italia, a risposte emergenziali. L'emergenzialità è la risposta meno adeguata, ma purtroppo sembra risposta inevitabile ad una situazione di strutturale complessità, la cui soluzione potrebbe fondarsi solo sulle responsabile cooperazione tra Stati e istituzioni europee. Una strada per fornire una risposta ordinata ai problemi dell'immigrazione. Emergenzialità invece che è segnato e segnerà le politiche statali ed europei finché la definizione della collaborazione tra Stati e Unione Europea rimarrà d'appannaggio esclusivo della buona volontà degli Stati. Emergenzialità ancora senza il cui superamento ogni tentativo di definire serie politiche di integrazione dei migranti e dei richiedenti asilo e protezione internazionale diviene impossibile e molto difficile, anche a livello statuale. Emergenzialità che è anche la causa dell'adozione di soluzioni normative poco attento al piano dei diritti, perché dettate da condizioni appunto emergenziali, eccezionali, che favoriscono l'esclusione dei migranti e la loro subdola trasformazione in non persone, finendo quindi col sacrificare i diritti, come dimostrato da un rapporto recente del 2016 di Amnesty International intitolato Hotspot Italia, come le politiche dell'Unione Europea portano a violazione dei diritti dei rifugiati e dei migranti. Dinanzi a questa condizione di emergenzialità, l'Europa dei diritti deve rispondere con la responsabilità. La responsabilità che si risolve in un unico imperativo che a me piace citare sempre e che è ripreso da una nota pubblicazione di Hannah Arendt: trovare o ritrovare l'umanità in tempi bui. Grazie.
In this very confused situation, what has always happened is that Europe has tried to find solutions for emergencies, and as these were considered emergencies, not always the right approach has always been taken. So we have seen regulations, legislation that have not focused on human rights. Sometimes they have even removed these human rights from people. They've made these people non-human, and what has also come out in reports as well, especially reports from the European Union and other reports, is that all these policies and all these regulations are aimed at the exclusion of these people. In particular, I would like to quote a report by Amnesty International, which was issued in 2016, which was called "Hotspot Italy: How the European EU policies have led to a violation of human rights of migrants and asylum seekers." In conclusion, what I would like to say is that we really need Europe to address this situation, and in particular we need an approach in towards migration, in favor of migration, because what I would like to focus on is that we need to find always a way to find humanity in a way. And with this, I would like to conclude by quoting Hannah Arendt, who says that finding finding again humanity in dark ages. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Attilio, for your presentation that combined in a very interesting way the problem of universalization of rights and the centrality, new centrality of the borders. And I think we can reflect about migration more generally, about human rights, if we do not speak about borders. And the problem of borders take us back to the old problem of the relationship between territory, law, and sovereignty, and I think also can help us to avoid in a better way the problem we find when we switch from the human rights policies to human rights practice. Well, now second speaker is Professor Eirikur Bergman, Professor of Political Science at the Bifrost University, Iceland. Eirikur is a specialist of nationalism, and his more recent publication is about conspiracy and populism in Europe. His presentation is entitled "Anti-Immigrant Conspiracy Theories of Right-Wing Nationalist Populists in Europe and How to Respond to Them." Please, Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As you might see on the screen, I changed the title a little bit. If that's okay. Thank you so much for inviting me here, especially Susanna and all of you for showing up here. First of all, my name is Eirikur Bergman. I come from Iceland. My field, I'm a political scientist. I deal with nationalism, European integration, politics. I have a sideline as well, which is deliberative democracy, so I'm trying to combine a few things. But this topic here is based on a forthcoming book that I am finalizing and will be out with Palgrave Macmillan in about 3 months from now or so, titled Conspiracy and Populism, the Politics of Misinformation. And this is, I think, the first time actually that I'm presenting on this book of this new project. So I must apologize on beforehand if I'm a bit chaotic in discussing this, but I'm going to sort of take you on a short journey through the creation of this book, but hopefully I will end with some questions regarding challenges that liberal democracy is facing in wake of an avalanche of criticism from nationalistic populists and conspiracy theories that they uphold in the political discourse of today, and often has the aim of eroding what we have up until now viewed as a shared understanding of our liberal democracy. First of all, just a little context. In wake of the Second World War, the modern liberal democracy, the system of the new world, post-world order, if you like, is based on this idea of liberal democracy. A liberal democracy is not only a democracy, it's democracy with individual and human and civil rights. Power is balanced out. There is a request for democratic representation, rule of law, and a new institutional order was instated on top of the nation states, as we understand. And this is a picture of the UN building in New York. And obviously the institution that has gone the furthest in integration is the European Union. This is also the era where globalization really takes off, and vitally, migration, mass migration starts when basically Western Europe needs working people to come help rebuild the continent after the devastations of 2 world wars. If we go a little bit further into the end of the Cold War with the collapse of the Berlin Wall, Francis Fukuyama, professor of political science at Georgetown University in Washington DC, declared the end of history and the last man. Liberal democracy was the only game in town. All other variations of governance had lost credibility. Communism was dead. Nazism was dead. The totalitarian idea was out. Liberal democracy would be the way to go, at least for the Western world, if not the entire planet. Now, that understanding has been challenged somewhat in recent years. We have seen populist political parties surging throughout the Western world in 3 waves, if you like. The first wave starts in wake of the oil crisis in 1972, with the rise of the Front National in France, and also the progressive parties in Denmark and in Norway, and some other places. These are basically anti-tax, anti-elitist movements, demagogues on the fringe of society. Second wave rises with collapse of communism. This is when the period when Jörg Haider is taking authority in Austria, and skinheads are roaming the streets of Western Europe. And then the last and the third wave, which we are either on top of now and is then in receding, or is changing the game, sort of occurred in wake of the financial crisis in 2008. The difference from that wave of populist politics from the last one is that populism is moving much further into the mainstream. These are no longer challengers on the fringe of society. These are politicians dressed like mainstream politicians and adopting the central rhetoric in politics and claiming to be taken seriously as credible politicians, which the populists before did not do. They never claimed to be mainstream or being accepted. They wanted to challenge the mainstream system. So what are we dealing with? In a previous book I've come up with this definition for specific nationalist, notably right-wing populism. Now, nationalist right-wing populists, they discursively create an external threat to the nation. Currently, those are migrants mainly. Then, secondly, they accuse the domestic elite of betraying the people, even of siding with the external forces. And thirdly, they position themselves as the defenders of the nation, of the ordinary public against the elite and the external threat, a threat which they have largely themselves discursively created. So this is my homemade definition of nationalistic right-wing populism. Now, alongside the surge of populist politics in Europe, we have seen a simultaneous rise in conspiracy theories. Both tropes, conspiracy theories and right-wing populism, they share several attributes. For example, a shared duality, both divide between us and them, from the benign public and the evil elite or external threat. This is what we can call a Manchurian worldview, dividing between us and them, and both serve to erode trust in society. And here you have some numbers of the support for populistic conspiratorial parties rising from 6.7% in the 60s to 13.4% in the 2010s. This is a mean for Western Europe. Now, before, and a large part of the literature on both populism and conspiracy theories have revolved around those on the fringes, those that are challenging the mainstream political system from the periphery. Joe Ginski, who is one of the leading scholars on conspiracy theory, said that conspiracy theories are for losers. We are basically studying those that have lost out in society. And this resonates quite well with the search of the populistic actors. But interestingly, and that's what I'm also trying to do in this book, is that conspiracy theory of the far right are no longer only upheld by the periphery. They are not only upheld by the losers. Instead, they are upheld from the power centers themselves, even from powerful presidents of prominent countries like the United States and Russia. Trump. I mean, everything ends with Trump these days. Can't escape it. Here is one conspiracy theory. Trump insisted in an interview with George Stephanopoulos on ABC News that there have been thousands of people over in New Jersey, a heavy Arab population, that were cheering as the buildings came down, the 9/11 attacks. And then he added, I think Islam hates us. Now, if there was a large population of Arabs in New Jersey cheering as the 9/11 on 9/11, that would be something to report on. That would be of interest, but there is no evidence of any of it. And here are some other conspiracy theories. And in 2000, now in March, he boasted in an interview that he had in a meeting with Justin Trudeau, put forward facts, numbers that he had no knowledge of, which means that in many cases we have entered the area where politics are escaping from any factual evidence. Basically state what you like. The same is happening in Russia. Putin himself has implied that the punk rock group Pussy Riot are secret agents of Western secret services, rather than genuine protest movement within Russia. There are all sorts of stories of the West actively plotting to take down the Russian state, and then there are scattered on the internet all sorts of fake news, for example, of Angela Merkel being the secret daughter of Adolf Hitler. That in Sweden, the foreign minister Margot Wallström wants to sterilize all white men. And these stories are just everywhere in the public sphere at the moment. The Brexit debate, for example, here are some examples. One insisting that 1 million people would be entering the UK from Turkey if the UK would not leave the European Union. Now, this is completely irrespective to the fact that new member states need acceptance of the previous member states. So it was basically up to the UK government itself whether they would accept those alleged million Turks coming or not. And when criticized for being vague on facts, Michael Gove, a leading Brexiteer, replied, "I think the people in this country have had enough of experts." And this is a classic response of this post-truth era we're living in. My facts are equal to yours. Now, one of the main conspiracy theories of our days in Europe is that of Eurabia. The fear of the great replacement, that Europe is under siege by the migration, that there is an active plot in the Arab world of conquering Europe through mass migration. Now, this is not necessarily a conspiracy theory if you are simply afraid of structural forces altering the face of the European continent. But when you actually mix an insistence that there are active plotters within Europe, cultural Marxists, for instance, or institutions like the Illuminati or whatever you would like, that are actively promoting this, then you have entered into the conspiratorial world. And these are theories that are upheld by politicians that enjoy large-scale public support in elections. Marine Le Pen and the Front National she grabs large shares of the votes in France, and so does Geert Wilders and his Freedom Party in the Netherlands. So these are no longer views that are only isolated on the farthest fringe. These are large swaths of the populations who are voting for politicians that uphold these theories. One example is of the Park 51, a mosque that, or Muslim community center that was to be built downtown in New York City. And there you have prominent politicians upholding rhetoric, as here is an example of. Now, over in Sweden, for example, a member of the Sweden Democrats, Martin Street, was a local council member. He says, Muslimer är inte 100% människor, which, for those of you that don't speak Swedish, means Muslims are not 100% human. Now, these are not the neo-Nazis that are patrolling the streets and shouting Nazi slogans dressed in sort of neo-Nazi armors, and we can simply dismiss as ludicrous people. These are elected representatives in established Western democracies. Dressed in suits, not in leather jackets, with hair, not skinheads. Another example, Siv Jensen of the Progressive Party of Norway, she talks about sneak Islamization. It's all the same. And then you have crazy fake news like that House Democrats have just moved to implement Sharia laws in America. Now, here we come to perhaps what I'm trying to do in this book, Conspiracy and Populism, is also trying to understand how is this message being received by the public. And I'm going to give you some extreme examples, so I warn you that this is not the reception that is how most people sort of take this message, but this is also the consequence. Anders Breivik in 2011 went to an island just outside of Oslo and massacred 70 young people who were attending a summer camp of the Labour Party there. His explanations was that cultural Marxists in Norway were ruining the country, and the Labour Party was responsible for it by allowing mass migration. It's basically just echoing the rhetoric of the Progressive Party in Norway, which he had been a member of himself. Thomas Mehr, murderer of Joe Cox in Labour Party Member of Parliament in the UK. This murder occurred during the Brexit debate, and before the court he echoed completely the rhetoric of the Brexiteers. When asked what his name was, he replied, "My name is death to traitors, freedom from Britain." We can go on. Timothy McVeigh in the US. Or just for Edgar Wells. In December 2016, he stormed into a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. with an assault rifle, attempting to free captured children that Hillary Clinton and other Democrats were keeping there in a pedophile ring in the pizza parlor. Now, he had learned this from news stories online, and he was horrified. He wanted to do something about it, but he became quite surprised when entering the pizza parlor and found no captured children. And replying to The incidentally said, well, the intel on this wasn't 100%. So, we are facing with ongoing and growing fear of invasion of external evildoers with help of internal traitors in Europe. Now, of course, the populists that I've been discussing here cannot be held directly responsible for any of these actions that I have just taken some examples of. But still, we can't neither completely escape from the fact that sometimes political message is received in a different way than they are meant to. And here is one example of scaremongering of prominent politicians by now. Nigel Farage, leader of UKIP, who insisted that Britain was at a breaking point and migrants were flowing freely into Britain, and that's why they had to leave the European Union. And like somebody noted in the UK, when you keep screaming breaking point, you can't really be surprised when somebody breaks. Okay, now we come to what I really wanted to talk about, and I guess I'm about to be finished with my time. All of this sort of serves to erode what we have come used to view as our shared understanding of liberal democracy. Politics in Western Europe, in the West in general, has been conducted within a shared framework of liberal democracy that nobody really has contested. Democratic representation, rule of law, human rights, free media, checks and balances on authority, these types of things. What sets the nationalistic populists aside from mainstream parties is that they don't accept this shared framework any longer. They are happy to challenge that common understanding in the post-world era. And we have seen this, for example, in opinion polls that show us that democracy is viewed to be less important now than it used to. And we are losing sight of history also. I'm perhaps going to end on a note like something like this. For example, right-wing populist Viktor Orban, he said that Trump's victory marks America's transition from liberal non-democracy to real democracy. So it's the liberal part of the liberal democracy that he has beefs with. And I think there is something to this. If we take the criticism of the populist far right and the conspiratorialists, then there is a part of the rhetoric that we should take seriously. One is that democracy has gradually been moving from the people to apparatuses that are outside of the democratic control of the people. For example, to unelected official technocrats and professional bodies, to interest groups and lobbyists, to international treaties, institutions and global actors that are not democratic, courts and independent agencies, to financial elites. And I think this is true. Now, the response of the nationalistic populists to this change is to roll back internationalization, to roll back globalization, going back to some sort of a re-nationalization of the integrated Europe, for instance, towards what we can call authoritative or illiberal democracy. Where leaders are not constrained by these checks and balances, where nations are not constrained by the international order, that they think that the ordinary public is not constrained by globalization. So it's a call for illiberal democracy, more nationalization. But there might be another avenue to address these real problems, which I think are actually there. And that is why we are here today, I guess, which is to democratize the international order rather than rolling back to everything back to the nation state. For example, democratizing the EU much further, and sort of weave social justice and liberal rights into the global arena. I have no answers as to how to do that. That's why I'm here listening to you who have answers to that. I'm just fleshing out the problem. But perhaps there is a guiding light in how we can do that. This is what Jens Stoltenberg, the Prime Minister of Norway, responded to the terrorist attack of Anders Breivik. He said, "Our response is more democracy, more openness and more humanity." I think there is something in that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric, for this brilliant trip within the crisis of liberal democracy after the Second World War. That shows very well the connection between the right-wing nationalist, populist and conspiracy policy. It's very interesting that you remind us this conspiracy policy as stressed by the elite most of the times, and we often forget this. Probably during the discussion we talk about the answers to this problem, and remind you of last slide. Perhaps history could be a good answer to deconstruct these policies. Well, now from Iceland to North Rhine-Westphalia, I think. The next panelist, the next speaker is Peter Schiffauer. Peter Schiffauer is honorary professor at the Faculty of Law of the Fern University in Aachen and director of the University Dimitris Tsatsos Institute for European Constitutional Sciences. His research is focused basically on fundamental rights and European political parties and European integration. The presentation written with Isabella Schiffauer is on refugees, protection, political asylum, and economic migration, subject to democratic contingency. Please, so here, speaker.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It is a pleasure to share these fascinating debates on University of Law. And in the first place, I apologize to my wife, who unfortunately has to lecture today at her home university. So I'm going alone to speak, but I'm not going out to read out the small essay we have written for this conference. I will rather try to resume the key points. Now, what you have done, you have tried to look at the performance of democratic procedures in dealing with the phenomenon of migration and perceive that phenomenon. We thought we ring-fence it with two statements which show the wideness. The one is from William Lacy Swin, who is director of the United Nations International Organization for Migration. He said, "Migration is not a problem to be solved, it's a human reality to be managed." So the question is, may the management of such human reality be left to the contingency of democratic procedures? Or is it rather bound to obey the achievements of human culture that it has become so stable that hardly anyone dares opposing them in public? That's the one side. On the other side, there is a remarkable statement of a man of the church, Cardinal Reinhard Marx, who was representing Catholic bishopry of Germany at the European Union level, and is also apparently very influential with the Curia in Rome. He said, Europe would deeply change if it were to build a wall around itself with the aim to defend its wealth against the rest of the world. That is not my Europe. I believe that feeling inspires sympathy. Still, the question is how to bring these two poles together and how to manage this through democratic procedures. Now, I have been active professionally in European Union affairs, and so it is no wonder that in the first place I look what the European Union is or was doing. And, well, we note there is much talk about the human tragedy. There is a decision to relocate a relatively small number of migrants who have arrived in Greece and in Italy to other member states, but a decision which has not, or practically, to a very small extent been implemented. There is, of course, the Schengen system of dealing with demands for asylum, and there are more recently different measures to, well, called to manage the external borders of the European Union, or to take up the idea which you have quoted from your Italian minister, well, to forward the European Union border to North Africa, but not in a sense of extending that polity to a larger part of the world, but rather to be able to push back migrants already in Africa, because for humanitarian reasons it is not possible to push back migrants when they are arriving at the northern coast of the Mediterranean. So it's all not very sympathetic to the, let's say, to the global phenomenon of migration. Indeed, these measures, albeit coming from a transnational body, in substance, they are relying on democratic legitimacy on a national level. The relocation decision was taken by the Council of Ministers intergovernmentally, without any parliamentary involvement. The Schengen system either was invented by just intergovernmental agreement, without any parliamentary involvement. And the measures on the border management or measures of the executive branch. So there is no real start of transnational democracy in these present EU measures. They are still it. They are relying on national patterns. And there I rejoin our colleague Duffer of yesterday. He said, yes, these are identitarian patterns of inclusion-exclusion. And of course they are not only relying on psychology, well, they are relying, they may go back to tribal experience, but anyway, they have been thoroughly cured since the Peace of Westphalia with the upcoming of the nation state. The nation state very much favored national identity feelings, and there is sound historiographic work to show that this is a product of history and not a natural development. So there the procedures are framed by this way of thinking, and the question then is, would possibly a transnational level of democracy allow to overcome this? Now, think about the scenario. It's counterfactual, clearly, because the European Union member states would not do that. But think about the scenario: the European Union member states hand over to the European Union institutions the power to decide on immigration in the whole of the European Union. That would mean that the in-group from 55 million in Italy or 80 million in Germany rises up to 500 million of European Union citizens. But still, the out-group is 7 to 8 billion global population. So, my guess is that the same constraints of in-group, out-group would be reproduced if democratic decision-making through a representative mechanism is moved from a national to, say, regional level, European level. So indeed, for that structure of democracy representing interests, the only theoretically convincing solution would be a kind of a global assembly. With all the problems it arises, in particular, it is very far from being, from possibly being reached, but also the problem how to safeguard the legitimate interests of minorities in an assembly which has to be workable, so it cannot be 10,000, but which represents the global population. There I have no answer, and I'm not going deeper into that matter. I simply say we are somewhere at the borderline of what presently can be achieved. Thus, the intermediate result, looking at the level of democratic procedures, is that there is not really a promising way forward. So, I would then, in a second step, propose to look at the culture underlying democratic procedures. Because we are speaking about democracy. Bergson spoke about democracy. He denied democracy at European Union level. I would strictly oppose that view, but this is another discussion. But it is very much, it is not absolute, there is no consensus at all about what democratic procedures really are and what a culture of democratic procedure means. Because you can have an assembly of populists which even may come to a majority, and still such a deliberation may not meet the criteria of inter-society consensus which comes from a big debate and which, in the sense of, for example, Habermas, represents moral quality. So there is much to be thought about a democratic culture, and I can here only touch a few aspects. The first I want to raise is that, because we encounter that problem throughout Europe, not everywhere, but in many states. We encounter the problem that the sovereignty of state is conceived as being beyond the law. Like 200-300 years ago, the absolute monarch felt above the law. Now, today, there are some democracies who feel that by majority decision of whatever representative organ, they are beyond the law. And well, I can quote, for example, a Hungarian referendum of two years ago, where the government asked the citizenry, do you agree that Hungary implements a decision of the European Union on relocation of migrants? So, plainly, they ask the citizenry, are you prepared to respect the law? This morning, Isabella wrote me that the Polish President Duda apparently has suggested to hold a referendum in Poland with a similar questions, with a question which in substance would result to: would you, Polish citizens, advise the government to respect international law? So we cannot take it for granted that the law is respected. And also, having worked in parliamentary practice, it was often a difficult task to make present to political decision makers that there is a law to be respected. So I think we have very much to insist on that point. But raising the issue of law is not everything, because it's wonderful to state what the law is, but if there is no institutional asset, no jurisdiction who has a final say on what the law means, and if there is no executive power that can implement and execute judicial decisions, the law remains pure theory. So, if you move to that transnational level, you also have to build up the corresponding implementation structures. But there is a second danger, and the second danger comes from an immanent structure in legal thinking. Legal thinking, of course, is based on the equality of all human beings. Die Gleichheit vor dem Recht. All are equal before the law. That leads necessarily to a certain formalism. Indeed, look at the law, and we do not look whether the person has brown hair or has no hair at all, but we apply the law. But this kind of formalism has danger, because when an individual claims his full law, without any, this is my law, I go ahead, you come to a conflicting society which you may perhaps not resolve. Okay, that's fine. The point is that when it comes, for example, to the issue of migrants, positions of law, legitimate on the one side, have to be weighed against legitimate legal positions on the other side. There is the secular principle that a people can defend its own territory and its own culture. And there is also reality that if a people rigidly opposes any change, it will be overthrown by turbulences like by violent earthquake. So the point is that also with regard to the implementation of rights, we need a kind of measure and moderation and the weighing of the rights of both sides. To give an example with regard to migration, a recent law in France was debated. One of the elements was the abbreviation of the deadlines for bringing a case against the refusal of asylum. The one saying this is an infringement of human rights because the poor people don't have the time to prepare the case. And the other say, oh no, but if you look at them all together, they have an interest that the cases are dealt with quickly. So this is simply, it has to be weighed against the other, and the insisting point doesn't really convince. Two additional elements, and I close. The one, if we insist to defend our freedoms in our society, I think we have to erect a ban against fundamentalism of any kind, be it a religious one, a political one, a philosophical one. Utterances which are denying to the other the right and of tolerance or hurting his or her feelings should be banned from our public scene. And this is valid in the same way for those who stay in the place, who are there, but also for the newcomers and their descendants. Because this is a long conflict, for example, which I'm experiencing in Germany. that that sometimes the second generation radicalizes and tries to overthrow a given society, and of course there it is room to conflict, and the issue of legitimacy is very, very delicate. The second one is the principle of measure and moderation in the implementation of law. Not straightforward. Try to understand. This is the only way that we can, in some way, approach better what is a human tragedy like migration, but which is coming from global, from a global circumstances we cannot change, and we have in some way to cope with.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for your presentation. That following up the presentation of Ericur about what remains of democracy, deal with democracy. Democracy. So we have first panel on borders and on the relationship between borders and human rights. Second one on nation state, identity, memory, and democracy, and finally, again, democracy as theoretical problem, human rights, and again, the relation between the European level and state level. Well, that's means sovereignty. So, I think we have time for a discussion, and it's open, please. So, one. Then someone. Okay. Here.
Yes.
Okay, the first three, and then I go on.
Okay, just a short comment on Professor Bergman's very interesting intervention. I share nearly all your comments, and the information was very good. We could add other examples from Italy of this kind, but of course we do not. Just one critic I have. I think that in your speech there was a thesis of opposition between, on one side, the liberal democracy, and the other side, populism, right populism, racism, and so on. I think this is true to a certain extent, but we also have to see another relation among the two, which is a relation of derivation. Let's see, the right populism derives from liberal, so-called liberal democracy, and we have historical examples like Nazism, which derived from the crisis of Weimar Republic, or fascism in Italy derived from the crisis of the so-called Umbertine state. This is not merely a factual consideration. We also have to see some reasons. For instance, the reason that liberal democracy doesn't give concrete answers to need of people nowadays, for a series of reasons which are also inherent to globalization processes. You also made some hints to the situation at the end of your speech when you spoke about the fact that globalization, the elites, and so on. These are not the invention of populistic politicians. This is a reality, unfortunately. Other are invention, of course, many kind, like that of the substitution of the labor force and so on. But it is true that we are facing a situation now of crisis of liberal democracy, which in my way is inherent from the very basis of this so-called liberal democracy. But the discourse could be too long, so I will detain myself here. Just to say that we need, in order to counter efficaciously this phenomena of right-wing populism, we need not to reassert the liberal democracy, but we need to go far beyond liberal democracy, inventing other type of systems and giving radically different responses.
It's related Professor Bergman? Or also, perhaps, is that a question to Professor Bergman? So please.
Yes, thank you. Well, I don't disagree with any of that. These are obviously often difficulties with how to define terms, but I use the word liberal democracy to describe the sort of Second World War liberal order in Western Europe, in the US, in the West, if you like, and the framework which the populists are challenging there is not the democratic aspect of the liberal democracy. They claim to be the bastions of democracy. They claim to be those that are campaigning for increased democracy, but it's the liberal part, the part that deals with constraints on majority rule, for example, that they are challenging. Checks and balances, human rights that constrain democracy or the majority rule. Free media, this is part of our liberal democracy. Independent academia, these types of things. This is a framework that we have united around, more or less, from right to left in politics. This system of liberal democracy has not been challenged in the post-war era by powerful mainstream political parties. So this is the challenge to liberal democracy, and like I was trying to say, address in my presentation, is that there is something to that criticism of the erosion of authority from the people to unelected bodies, whether those are internal or global or regional or whatever, and that's where their arguments should be taken seriously, and we need to engage in how to deal with that criticism, which is their, in my mind, the regional part of the rhetoric. And so I don't think we are in any disagreement.
Do you have a question to Professor Bergman? Yes, please.
Just a very quick one on that last point, which was about liberal democracy. I guess obviously we're talking about the topic of democracy, this whole conference, this whole 2 days, but we've not really analysed what we mean when we're talking about democracy. And obviously, I think we probably all have a relatively okay understanding of what we mean by liberal democracy. But you mentioned some of your other work was about deliberative democracy. I just wondered if you could maybe speak a little bit about that, so we could get an idea of maybe an alternative model. Thanks.
I'm happy to. Yeah, well, this is there. I come to that from a completely different point of view. I didn't mention that when I was introducing myself. I was a member of the Icelandic Constitutional Council, which some of you might have heard of. This was in operation in 2011. There were 25 citizens elected in Iceland to revise the constitution. And in wake of that, I became interested in the vast academic field and also practical in democracy, which is deliberative democracy. And there's something wrong with the sounds. I don't know what it is. And there are so many exercises around the world dealing with how to not replace our representative democracy, but augment the liberal democratic systems that we live in. And I think, and I mean, all sorts of sort of alternatives have been given, like direct democracy, referendums. We all go online and vote for whatever. Go into the style of the Swiss democratic models and all that. But deliberative democracy is, in my mind, or what I've been looking at, is where you take polarizing issues, where there is a clear trade-off in specific aspects that the representative democracy has failed to resolve, and you ask a body of citizens. They can be elected, they can be randomly selected. This is what we can call citizen panels, to deliberate on specific issues. And as a political scientist, I have been very skeptical on these bodies, but I've seen them working quite well in many places, where you sort of add on to our democratic system and a new mechanism. For example, in Porto Alegre, in Brazil, they have since 1989 taken part of their city budget and put that to the street for people to participate in what they call participatory budgeting, where people meet and deliberate and prioritize part of the budget. This has now spread to more than 100 places in South America. In the Netherlands, there was the Burgerforum that was to change the electoral system. You had the citizens' assemblies in Ontario, British Columbia. There is a citizens' assembly in Estonia, and now in Ireland you had the Constitutional Convention, where 100 people were selected, 66 randomly selected citizens and 33 members of parliament that have been changing the Irish constitution very successful. So this is what I mean by deliberative democracy. It is very sort of, well, this is perhaps the practical aspect of what I'm interested in, because these bodies can actually help, and I can announce here perhaps that a group of scholars have applied to the European Union Cost Action Programme to set up a network on deliberative constitutional democracy, and it has been accepted. So we will start this project now with, I think, 60 universities in Europe at least going about that. So just trying to tie that into my presentation a little bit, I think this is one of the things, one of the tools, one of many that can be used to actually deal with the feeling that many ordinary citizens do have, that authority is being taken away from them. And this could actually help legitimizing the Western democratic systems if we add a component to our liberal democracy. This could be these citizens' panels. Sorry, this is ranting now.
Well, please.
Okay. Peter, thank you for acknowledging that Europe, even if it was more democratic, could not solve the problem of immigration, because the pressure, the reason, underlying reason is global, and that is global inequality. And until we have mechanisms for some kind of redistribution of power and wealth at the global level, which today we don't, Europe will not be able, this way or by nationalism or by any other way, unless by a very inhumane way of just raising the walls, to address the problem, but not in any humane way. The solution is human solution. That's what we need. And you say, oh, that of course cannot be done, cannot have that. And I would say that this is not a law of nature, that we cannot have human decision making, we cannot have redistribution. I remember that the ruling classes in past centuries used to say, oh, surely we cannot redistribute power to the masses and have democracy and all of that, and they were wrong. So I think that we should not accept it as a physical truth of the reality of the world, that we cannot have any form of redistribution to address global inequality.
I certainly do not oppose you. I simply think that you cannot sit back in our chair and say, well, we do not have what we need, so we cannot do anything. We have to also try to cope with the means we have. And, well, the European Union is a certain regional agglomeration of public power in a dimension with regard to its economic weight comparable to the United States of America, or to Russia, or to China. As long as there is no functioning global system of governance, the technical mean we have is a way to a kind of multilateralism. We have to try what we can do, and of course it is in the action programs you see improve the conditions of life and of economy in the regions from where the biggest flux of immigration comes. This is in the programs, but you are right. The budgetary means for that programs are not sufficient to really change the situation. But yeah, it has to be. You have to to improve the means, to enlarge the means, perhaps by associating other powers, perhaps other regional structures, in order to get somewhere. What counts, in my view, and there I come back, is a deliberation process. I come back to Bergson, because he provokes me, and so I need to comment on that. We need a deliberation process, and we need an informed deliberation process, a cultivated deliberation process, not just what people in the street feel. They may perhaps be right whether the path for the bicycle should be on the left side or on the right side of a certain quarter in the city. There they are close.
On what level the deliberation needs to be? On what level does the deliberation need to be?
Well, for the moment being, we have the multilateral level, the regional level of the European Union is not a bad, and we have to see, well, the United States of America is big enough, China is big enough, India is big enough, Brazil perhaps, but for the rest we have to, policies favoring to promote other regional agglomerations, like Mercosur, like the African Union, which are certainly underdeveloped, but which could be a path forward. But, okay, I think I will not monopolize the discussion, but there is one point I have to make. And it's because there is the famous polemic against decisions taken by unelected bodies. Compare decision-making on national level with decision-making in international institutions. You will see no difference on national level as on transnational level. The decisions are framed by a large bureaucracy. by a bureaucracy of experts. Because the facts on which they're dealing with are complex and need information. The decisive question is that the ones who take the decision are elected. And there, and I, with all respect, colleague Bergson, I believe that on the European Union level, there is as much legitimacy through election as there is on the national level.
Thank you. We have two other. I have two questions. Your question and you. Well, last one. The coffee break. Susanna told me is waiting for us, so we can, if you reduce time for the question now, and 1, 2, and 3. Okay, I think we can do. Yes, please. Very quickly.
So thanks for the intervention. I would like to address mainly Pisano about like in English or in Italian, about this sense of belonging to the same community. It's actually that's a long-standing debate about human rights, that it expresses the ideology, ethics, aesthetic sensibility, political practices of a specific place and moment, which is the Western one toward the 18th through 20th century liberalism. So, like claiming something which is partisan, global, can we risk to be to impose our view toward other cultures? So it means it is not democratic anymore. And actually, I can feel about the example of Gandhi answering a comment on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, who said actually that there is no, like he learned from his mom that there is no right without a duty well performed. And even in China and Japanese, they don't have this vocabulary of right. So we don't risk to make something partisan, global, which is not global in its nature.
The question of Professor Isano or some opinion on to Peter. You, please.
I agree that we need to express compassion and humanity to refugees, and we have to find a way in the short term. And so, in a sense, I agree with both of you, but I think it's what we are not doing, or not doing enough of, that's the problem. And it is who is not in this room that's the problem. You know, the fact that the liberal left has utterly failed to see the real urgent need for some form of binding cooperative global governance is why the populists are on the march. You know, it is the fact that where is Greenpeace in this room? Where are the big NGOs? Where are the Labour parties from around the world? They're not here. They've all got their head in the sand, and that is why, do as much as we like and can, it will never be enough until we start to recognise the need for some kind of global governance that is binding and cooperative, because without that, we have no hope, ultimately.
I'd like to come back to Odet's discussion. To us world federalists, the European Union is the example of it. So the Union has a principle of solidarity, right? Equal rights and equal opportunities for citizens, and they allot structural adjustment funds to the more backward regions. And they have EU citizenship, so free movement between European countries. But we'd like to see that extended to the global scene. We'd like to see a global parliament. We'd like to see world citizenship, where people are free to move between any one country and another. But I feel we're not ready for that, and perhaps this is the root of the problem we're facing at the moment. People would be afraid of hundreds of millions of poor Chinese or poor Africans flooding into Europe and causing chaos. So until we have a global principle of solidarity in operation, basically, until we've brought the more backward regions up to speed economically, we won't be able to implement formal global citizenship, free movement of people between one country and another. So I think it all comes back to this principle of solidarity. Would you agree with that?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the...
First,
don't worry, don't worry.
Okay, so I take first. Thanks. If you then read our essay, you will find the issue of solidarity and how solidarity can be achieved through democratic systems is a main topic which we have dealt with, but which I have not spelled out. But still, the European Union is an achievement, but we are not yet fully there where you believe. Some time ago, together with Isabella, we have published an essay on the constitutional ambiguity of the European Union in the field of migration, inner EU migration. Because, well, we have acknowledged the principle of free movement of workers fully, without any limitation. But it was always handled in a way that it would not exceed a certain measure. And once migration movements within the European Union became really massive, we had problems. Like when Tony Blair omitted to negotiate in the adhesion agreement for the Central and Eastern European states. He omitted to negotiate a transitory rule for free movement of workers from Eastern Europe. United Kingdom was the only state which didn't apply transitory rules. All other states had limitations for incoming workers from Eastern Europe. And so they all moved to the United Kingdom. And that had an interesting counter-reaction in the citizens. And another example, of course, that's within the European Union, but I can give you even an example within a state. It is when Germany in 1990 prepared for unification. Enormous measures of solidarity were decided. Enormous financial transfers from the West to the East. Why? There was only one reason. Because otherwise, people would have voted with their feet and would have massively wandered to the West. This was not wished by politics. Politics wanted to avoid substantial migration streams because of the dangers of the fear of disruptions. Be it right, be it wrong, I'm not in a position to judge. But we can say that the fear of migration is an underlying motive in global politics.
Very quickly, I agree with you with the first question. When we speak about human rights, we have to consider that human rights are strictly rooted in our cultural tradition, in our Western tradition. But the situation from a political point of view now is very different from the situation we had during the debate of the Universal Declaration in the middle of the last century. Human rights at the moment are a lingua franca of the international relation because are a phenomenon which is widespread all over the world thanks to the international legal system, thanks to what Jake Donnelly defined global human rights regime and so on. So, despite the particularistic roots of human rights, we can say that human rights is a global phenomenon. But the problem is another one, and it was what I wanted to be focused within my paper. that human rights are a European trademark. Europe without human rights is not Europe. So when I spoke about responsibility, when I speak about the attention that the European institution, and specifically the states, the European states and the European Union have to give to human rights, it was because human rights and Europe are more or less the same thing. So we have two levels, a global level and a regional level, supranational level, that is in Europe is very important to be human rights centered when we speak about migrants and migration. And this is a link also with the second question. We don't do anything to solve the situation. I agree with you, but I think that the supranational level is the only level that we can use to be more near to the humanities, the idea of the humanity against any kind of dehumanization, because the dehumanization is more simple in the national level, where the populism, the anti-immigration parties, the rhetoric of these kinds of parties are more simple to be done, to be realized.
Well, thank you, Attilio. Thank you, Ayub. Thank you, Peter. I think we have earned our coffee break. So, see you in 11:30. I think I don't see Susanna, but I think we have a quarter. Thank you.